NASA may have scrapped its plans to put women and people of color on the moon, but it has its sights set on a new milestone: a nuclear reactor on the lunar surface. A new directive reportedly aims to launch a nuclear reactor there by 2030, much earlier than previous plans that focused on the mid-2030s. That later time frame is also when China and Russia expect to partner up on a nuclear-powered outpost on the moon for humans. The updated schedule calls for spending on the project despite a massive budget cut for NASA from the White House this year. Many questions here. Let's try and answer them and bring in Lee Billings. He's a senior news editor covering space and physics at the Scientific American magazine. Lee, welcome to DW. Now, break this down for us. Right now, NASA isn't even putting people on the moon, and in 5 years, they want to build a nuclear reactor there?
Yeah, that's true. It does seem a little ridiculous when you look at the timing, but it is very well motivated. This is technology that is relatively well developed in many other sectors. And NASA has been trying to develop, and other space agencies have been trying to develop nuclear reactors for space applications for quite some time. The trouble is, right now, if it's supposed to go there and power a human outpost, for instance, well, we don't have a human outpost there, and I doubt we'll have one there in 5 years.
Mm-hmm. And looking at the timing, it does seem a bit over-ambitious, doesn't it? Especially considering that NASA is facing huge funding cuts right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It does seem a bit overambitious with regard to timing. And the funding cuts, of course, many of those that have been proposed by the Trump administration appear to be being reversed or are being reversed by Congress. So it's unclear what the budgetary status will ultimately be. But a lot of those cuts are being made in service to human exploration. So what's happening is a lot of science is being cut, but that often is being, those cuts are being made in favor of maintaining budgets or even increasing budgets for things like the race to get back to the moon.
Mm-hmm. Let's look at the technicalities. Why does the U.S. government want to put a nuclear reactor on the moon?
Right. Well, that's a kind of complicated answer, and the simplest thing to focus on is capability. In space, beyond Earth, power is life. It gives you margin that you need if you're trying to stay alive. And most of the power that we use in space comes from the sun, just like on Earth. The sun's the ultimate source of power. But the trouble is that in certain places, like the moon, where you have 2 weeks of lunar night and it gets very cold and very dark, or like on Mars, you don't necessarily have enough sunlight to give you all the power you need. So something like a nuclear reactor is a very good idea in those sorts of circumstances if you want to stay alive.
Walk us through the process then. What would it take to actually build a reactor on the moon?
So one thing to say is that I'm not a nuclear engineer, so I'm not going to get super duper into specifics. But one big difference with the moon, of course,
a very small amount of our viewers are nuclear engineers, so we'll be fine.
We'll be fine. We'll be fine. There's no air, and there's not really any liquid water on the moon. It's not easy to get rid of heat. Nuclear reactors make heat. They use that heat to generate electricity by having some kind of working fluid that then turns a turbine and creates power. That's going to be tough to do to get rid of that heat on the moon. So a lot of the designs for nuclear reactors in space have very, very large radiators to radiate the heat away. And that's something that you'd see in something like this that would be landed on the lunar surface. One thing to emphasize, though, is we're talking about something that would generate on the order of 100 kilowatts of power. That's about enough to power, let's say, a large office building or two, and certainly a crewed lunar outpost. We're not talking about a vast, sprawling complex of nuclear reactors that would generate gigawatts of power, enough to power a city, for instance. So these are relatively small, compact pieces of hardware, and we're already really good at making them to various degrees. We put them in nuclear submarines all the time, for instance. So it's not that much of a leap to think we could put it on the moon. But of course, there are some technicalities there that we can get into.
Putting it on the moon means getting radioactive material to the moon. You know, we've seen, especially in recent years, many rockets blow up, and I feel like that could be potentially a quite dangerous endeavor for all of us folks here down on Earth, couldn't it?
Absolutely. That is a very significant risk. It's a risk that can be managed. We've launched a lot of nuclear material into space over the years, most of it without hazard and harm. There have been instances where rockets have blown up. There have been tests where we have ways of keeping the nuclear material, the fissile material, safe and enclosed, even against something like a rocket explosion. So it is, however, a serious concern. It's not something to take lightly. And there are other sorts of protocols and things you can do to minimize some of the risks, using obviously a well-proven safe launch vehicle, which something like SpaceX's Starship is not yet showing. Maybe it will soon. Also, you wouldn't, for instance, turn the reactor on until you got it to the surface of the moon. You know, you're not going to start a nuclear reaction up in your delicate, fragile spacecraft in orbit. So it is a very significant risk, but it is one that can be managed and that we've managed to manage in the past.
All right. That sounds good. When presenting this plan, the U.S. also cited similar Chinese and Russian ambitions and that they wanted to beat them to it before they could establish what they called keep-out zones. What's that about? Can we just claim parts of the moon now?
Right. Well, so this gets into the other reason, obviously, that the United States or anyone else want to put a nuclear reactor on the moon. It's not just about survival. It's not just about having power. It's about having infrastructure there that you can then point to say, this is a sensitive region. No trespassing. Don't go there. Because according to the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which I believe the U.S. has signed on to, as well as Russia and I'm not sure about China offhand, you can't own any part of the moon or any other celestial body outside of Earth. You can't officially own it. But if you have sensitive infrastructure there, like a nuclear reactor or a crewed outpost, you can make the argument that any other spacefaring power, in the interest of peaceful exploration and use of outer space, should pay what's called due regard to that infrastructure. And that's how you get this notion of a keep-out zone. And the idea is that there are some parts of the moon that are hot properties, that are hot real estate, if you will, where many different people would like to go. And maybe not everyone can fit all in the same place. So that's why you'd want to do that, why you want to have a keep out zone notion, whether that's the US doing it or Russia or China or who knows.
It sounds a bit like a return to the old space race, doesn't it?
It does, and I have mixed feelings about that. But I'm excited about the prospect of something like nuclear power actually existing on the moon, because it would be a critical enabler for a lot of stuff. And we're not just talking about flags and footprints mission. We're talking about more robust scientific investigations. Specifically, we're talking about the South Pole of the moon, by the way. This is a region, and again, I mentioned it's kind of hot real estate. This is a region where it's not hot, it's cold most of the time. It's so cold, in fact, that there are craters there that are permanently shadowed on their bottoms. And there's water ice in the bottom of those craters, which can be turned into things like rocket fuel or even potable water for astronauts or cosmonauts or taikonauts to drink. So it's a really good place to be if you want to build a base and if you want to do good science there. Things like building giant radio telescopes on the far side of the moon that could glimpse back to the earliest moments of time to figure out how we all got to be here. Things like that. All of that could be enabled all that could be enabled by something like a robust form of power, like nuclear power.
Yeah, I mean, exciting stuff ahead, I'm sure, but it's all happening in parallel, right? The U.S. is now working on this while China and Russia are also working on it. There doesn't seem to be much cooperation, but wouldn't that push innovation a lot more productively than this kind of competition we're seeing now?
That's a good question, and I don't know if the answer is very straightforward. I think it's the kind of thing I wish that our global leaders would consider cooperation in some of these domains more often than they seem to. But that said, there are certain cases from space history, such as the construction of the International Space Station, for instance, where you can make a pretty compelling argument that the more partners you have, the more complexity you bring on, the more cooks that are in the kitchen, so to speak, the longer the dish takes to prepare and the more elaborate it might be. So getting everyone all on board and all on the same page with having a unified international lunar outpost, for instance, is a great idea in theory, but in practice, it may not work out so well, and it could cause significant delays and funding shortages or overruns that ultimately could jeopardize and even kill the project if we're talking about something that's very delicate and requires the support and the buy-in of multiple different nations and institutions.
Fascinating stuff. That was Lee Billings of Scientific American. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Nicole. Thank you.
And a note from NASA, they want a new executive in charge of the research effort by the end of this month. Until the end of this September, the agency will seek proposals from potential contractors who could build and install the project. NASA says it will award the contracts to 2 finalists by March 2026. So applications open if you want to give it a go.